Do you like Bizarre Podcasts? If the answer is yes, then why don't you join our Facebook group to be updated? Also, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter. Just search Bizarre Podcasts and look for the logo. And if you could leave a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. And now, on with the show.
Welcome to Bizarre Podcasts.
A doppelganger, in the everyday term, is a description of a person that looks identical to yourself or others. However, a paranormal doppelganger is a manifestation of an entity that looks identical to yourself or others, but with a creepy or disturbing demeanour. On today's show, we will be covering the best doppelganger stories that are said to be true, but as usual, I'll leave that up to yourselves to decide. The first and possibly most famous of the doppelganger stories happened to a 32-year-old French woman named Emilie Sagee. Emilie Sagee had decided to pursue a career in teaching and had been doing so for 16 long years, and it was said she was very good at her job. But for some unknown reason, Emilie moved from her place of employment quite often. In fact, a grand total of 19 times, and in 1845 the reason was discovered under very bizarre circumstances. One particular day, as Emilie was standing at the front of her classroom teaching, the students were shocked and terrified to discover an exact replica of Emilie appear out of thin air right next to her, mimicking her every move as she wrote on the chalkboard. As Emilie wrote on the board, the doppelganger did the exact same movements. The only difference was that the apparition didn't hold a stick of chalk in its hand, but still seemed to hold its hand in a way that suggested the chalk was indeed there, invisible or not. It was said that as soon as the entity appeared, the real Emilie seemed to go into a groggy trance-like state, and was totally oblivious to what the rest of the students were witnessing. The classroom was not the only place that the entity liked to appear. The entity also made an appearance one day as Emilie was eating her lunch, and this was witnessed by a room full of students. As Emilie sat eating her lunch, the doppelganger appeared directly behind her and started once again to mimic her moves, mirroring the exact same way that Emilie was eating her food. Every time the spectral doppelganger made an appearance, Emilie was totally oblivious. As time went by, it would soon become apparent that Emilie's strange doppelganger did not need to be in the same room as her to manifest. On one particular day, 50 students were all busy in their sewing class. The teacher rose from her chair and left the room temporarily. Seconds later, Emilie walked into the room and sat at the front of the class in the teacher's chair, with a blank expression on her face. The students carried on with their work until one of them gave out a gasp. As the student pointed with a shaking finger out of the window, she could see Emilie working in the gardens outside. The real Emilie. The students stared at the apparition of Emilie sitting in the chair in front of them, expressionless and emotionless. Two of the students decided to pluck up the courage to approach the apparition, and they later described what happened as they grew closer. They said the entity looked just like Emilie in every way, but when they bravely reached out and touched the figure sat in the chair, their hand just went through it. And they described the sensation as being quite similar to running your hand through a thick cobweb. Later, the real Emilie did state that when she was in the gardens picking flowers, she was in fact thinking about how much she would love to be teaching the sewing class inside, instead of being in the garden. And once again, she did recall becoming very tired and drowsy, as she always seemed to whenever the doppelganger appeared. One theory stated that Emilie could be conjuring up her entity by the power of the mind, by thought. For instance, the day that she was in the garden and wanted so much to be in the classroom, could this possibly have been a way of her mind projecting an image of herself in the classroom? Or could it be something more supernatural, something sinister? Emilie's spooky doppelganger continued to show up throughout the school, scaring the wits out of the students. The students would often see the ghostly twin manifest before their very eyes, either standing in the classroom or floating down the hallways. And as you can imagine, the students of the school became more and more freaked out by the whole thing, and eventually the school had no choice but to fire Emilie, due to the complaints from the students and the students' parents. And with that, Emilie left her place of employment once again for the 20th time, and hopefully her ghostly twin went with her. Another famous doppelganger case was said to have happened to a certain member of royalty in 1603, Queen Elizabeth I. It is said that she was a strong-headed woman who stood for no nonsense, so it was strange to have a report that she had indeed seen her own doppelganger. One night as the Queen entered her bedroom, apparently she saw the ghostly apparition lying on her bed, looking withered, gaunt, and on death's door. As I said, she was a level-headed woman and did not necessarily agree with any supernatural subject, but she was aware of old folklore tales that if you were to come in contact with your doppelganger, it was considered a very bad omen, and she started to refuse sleep by standing for 15 hours straight before she collapsed on the floor. It was said that she feared to go to bed in case she failed to wake up. And maybe it was a bad omen, for not long after, the Queen died at the age of 69, the same year she had had the vision. It was also recorded that another member of royalty had seen her doppelganger. This time, it was Catherine the Great, the 18th century Empress of Russia. Once again, like Elizabeth, she was a strong, ruthless woman who did not have time for superstition and nonsense. Until one particular night, as she lay in bed, her servants rushed into her room, looking shaken and worried. They reported that they had just seen her double enter the throne room, and this troubled them as they knew she was sound asleep in her room. Catherine threw on her robe and quickly left for the throne room, and when she arrived, she could see the ghostly vision of herself still sat on her throne. Shaken but raging that someone was sat on her throne, she ordered the guards to open fire on her doppelganger, and what happened next is lost to history, as the outcome is unknown. But what we do know is that shortly after, Catherine, the Empress of Russia, died. The next story took place at sea in June 1893. Admiral George Tryon was commanding 2 columns of ships off the coast of Syria. He gave his last command that day as he had the columns of ships turned towards each other in an attempt to perform a naval drill. However, this ended in tragedy as the first ships collided with each other, sinking the ship Admiral George Tryon was aboard, as well as 357 men who were now all doomed to drown as the ship sank into the cold depths. His last words were said to have been, "It is entirely my fault." At the exact time as the ship sank, the Admiral's wife was hosting a very fine party in their London home. The house was full of friends and family who all witnessed the following. It was said that the Admiral appeared at his London home and silently started to walk down the staircase, and then proceeded to walk through the drawing room with a look of sorrow on his face, and then opened the door as if he was leaving, and then he vanished right before their eyes. Interestingly, another name for doppelganger in old sailor folklore can also be called a fetch, which is described as a spirit of a sailor who visits loved ones one last time upon their death. And last but not least, Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln never denied his interest in the paranormal, and did indeed have a few of his own paranormal occurrences, and as you have probably guessed, he too witnessed his very own doppelganger. It was in the time of his first election. Abraham Lincoln had been working hard to rally up votes, and on one particular strenuous day, Abraham Lincoln decided a well-earned rest was needed. The president lay down on his couch and glanced into the mirror across from him and saw that his reflection seemed to have two separate faces staring back at him. The second face looked identical to himself, but was a ghostly pale colour and grim looking. Startled, he shot up from the couch and peered into the mirror once again, only to see the second face had now vanished. Shaken, the president must have just put it down to tiredness, but as he lay back down and glanced once again into the mirror, the horrific ghostly face reappeared, staring right back at him. As you can imagine, he was very shaken, but not as much as his wife, who was superstitious and believed this had to be a bad omen, and she came to the conclusion that two faces may mean that he would have 2 more elections and then something awful would happen. After the initial appearance of the doppelganger, President Lincoln did report seeing his mystical doppelganger in the mirror, but only one more time. It was never seen again. And as we all know, President Lincoln never made it through his second term, as he was assassinated on April the 14th, 1865. So there you have it, some of the best doppelganger stories out there. But whether you believe them or not is, like I always say, entirely up to you. But maybe next time you're looking into the mirror, maybe you should make sure that who's staring back at you is truly yourself. Take care. I'll see you next time.